In the 1600s and 1700s, Europeans were living through an unprecedented time of scientific and technological progress. That progress, created by the scientific revolution, only happened because people were willing to push against the authority of thousands of years of received wisdom and tradition to create new ways of thinking. Human reason now became the ultimate authority, and people questioned old systems and ways of thinking more than ever before. This led to a period of history in which people began to aim that skepticism towards their own governments, towards their own societies. They began to imagine new ways of running their societies, new ways of setting up their institutions of power. This period became known as the Enlightenment. By this point in history, Europeans had lived under the rules of kings and queens for over 1,000 years. And in the 1600s, those European rulers began to claim absolute power. They believed that they had a divine right given to them by God to rule exactly as they desired. It was perhaps only a matter of time before the scientific revolution's skepticism became aimed at these absolute notions of power. And that's why people began to imagine new ways of living in the world in this Age of Enlightenment. One of the first Enlightenment philosophers was a man named Thomas Hobbes, an English thinker out of the 1600s. He started by trying to imagine what humanity would be like without the rule of government, what humanity would be like in what's called a state of nature. And what Hobbes imagined was a terrible world. Without a powerful government to rule over and control people, humanity's evil would be set free. People would constantly be fighting against each other in a state of what he called a state of war of all against all. For Hobbes, it was obvious that a powerful government was necessary to control people and tell people what to do and what not to do. Perhaps we as humans need to surrender some of our rights in order to exist in such a society. But it's better to give up some of our rights to live within that civilized society than to live in the state of nature in which humanity's evil is set free. This idea that people need to give up some of their natural rights in order to live in a civilized society is called the social contract. And this idea of the social contract proved extremely influential to later Enlightenment thinkers. Not every Enlightenment thinker thought that people were naturally evil. Far from it. John Locke, for example, was another English thinker in the 1600s, and he believed that humans were a blank slate. When children were first born, they weren't naturally evil or good. They were a blank slate. And so for John Locke, education became extremely important. Locke also helped develop the idea of natural rights. Rights that were not given to you by a ruler, but that were given to you by God. Rights that you were born with. The most important of these natural rights he considered the right to life, the right to liberty, and the right to property. If somebody tries to harm your life, you try to escape from them. If somebody tries to lock you up and take away your liberty, you fight to set yourself free. And if somebody steals your property, you try to get the property back. It was the job of governments, Locke said, to protect those natural rights. This is actually a revolutionary idea. Rights don't come to you from the king. They're given to you by God, and it's the king's job to protect those rights for you. By entering into this social contract with a government, you make an agreement with your government. The government protects your natural rights, and by doing so, you agree to follow the rules of society. But there's an even more revolutionary idea that comes out of this. Because what happens if the government doesn't protect your natural rights? In that case, they're breaking that social contract. In other words, people now have the right to overthrow their government. This leads us to another thinker named Montesquieu. Montesquieu was a French thinker who lived in the 1700s. And observing the way that the king ruled France with the help of a couple of powerful aristocrats, a couple of powerful wealthy elites, he decided that power corrupts people. And so the best way to deal with power was by separating power. By separating the powers among many different people, you could take away its ability to corrupt the government. The three main powers of government, as outlined by Montesquieu, are the executive, legislative, and judicial. The executive branch of government's job is to enforce the law. And in the United States, this is largely carried out by the office of the president. The powers of the legislative branch is to write the laws. And in the United States, the legislative branch is occupied by Congress. And finally, the powers of the judicial branch of government is to judge the laws. And in the United States, this is done by the Supreme Court. As you can see, Montesquieu's idea of the separation of powers proved extremely influential when it came to formulating how the United States government should be set up and how it should work. Although the idea of the social contract was first introduced by Thomas Hobbes, no other thinker was more influential in the development of that idea of the social contract as was Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who lived in Geneva in France in the 1700s. In some ways, Rousseau was the opposite of Hobbes. Rousseau, unlike Hobbes, thought that human beings were naturally good. He believed that humans were perfectible, and through the use of their free will, they could make a better world. That meant that human institutions of power could be remade to serve society. The job of the government was not to control people, but to unleash human potential. In fact, for Rousseau, the whole idea of the social contract showed that power didn't come from the government. Power came from the people. Here's a quote from Rousseau that helps illustrate his ideas about the social contract. Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. The question for Rousseau was how to break those chains and set humanity free. Perhaps no other person is a better embodiment of the spirit and ideals of the Enlightenment than a man named Voltaire, who was a writer and philosopher who came out of France in the 1700s. He was a very revolutionary and powerful writer. He was famous for openly making fun of and criticizing old ways of thinking, traditions, and even religions, which got him into a lot of trouble. He wrote many plays in which he would wittily scrutinize and even ridicule institutions of power, most especially the Catholic Church. As you might expect, Voltaire faced a lot of censorship throughout his life, which is part of why he spent so much energy advocating for fundamental freedoms. Freedoms like freedom of speech or freedom of religion. Today, he is perhaps most remembered for his advocacy of the separation between church and state. This is the idea that the government should not be working in tandem with a religious institution. This is one of the foundational concepts of the United States government, and it comes directly out of Voltaire. These Enlightenment philosophers also directly inspired the founding fathers of the United States, who implemented these ideas into the new United States Constitution. It is impossible to think of the American Revolution and our current system of government without this Enlightenment period and without those Enlightenment thinkers. These ideas also helped inspire the French Revolution, which was extremely violent and chaotic. There, revolutionaries overthrew the monarchy and executed the king and queen. It sent shockwaves across the continent. And today, there are very few monarchies left in Europe. And even in the places where there are monarchies, like in the United Kingdom, the king and queen are vastly limited in their power. The power has largely been granted to the people and is separated among different branches of government. This comes directly out of that Enlightenment period. Today, the ideal of government is considered government of the people, by the people, for the people. This is actually a quote that comes out of Abraham Lincoln, but it is a direct reflection of these Enlightenment ideas. By starting the scientific revolution, thinkers like Francis Bacon and René Descartes implanted a deep skepticism in the mind of the West. It was perhaps only a matter of time before that skepticism became aimed at their own systems of government. Suddenly, everything could be improved. Suddenly, everything could be remade in the service of human liberation. This concludes Lesson 8 of Big Ideas Throughout History.